We play and call it work.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's Sit and Talk. First and foremost, 1,000 apologies for this not coming out earlier. As much as I preached this being my favorite show, I lost track of time on that day I was supposed to record this on, and it somehow slipped my mind for the preceding 4 days. So here I am with the Sit and Talk for you today, because I would not miss it for the world. And other than the fact that I forgot it. So I apologize about that. What this show is I'm going to sit here for probably a little bit over an hour because I got quite a bit of questions and I do have a little bit of time to kill. So I'm a little bit more free today to do this. So you're welcome. And more like a thank you for listening to me ramble. And I'm just going to be answering a bunch of questions that you have laid out for me. I'm going to be going through the website's questions on MiniWarGaming.com. But if I run out of those, I'll go to YouTube. That's like the standard format. And next week will be Matthew's Sit and Talk. He is one of the owners of MiniWarGaming. So if you have any questions for Matthew, if you're unfamiliar and you're new to this channel, well, now's a great opportunity to go ask him any of those questions. And again, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can leave questions there, but they will probably be missed. So go to MiniWarGaming.com instead, find this video there, and just leave the questions there. We typically try to get through all those instead. And that's where a lot of our Vault members leave their questions, and we try to get through the Vault member questions with a priority, because the Vault members are what helps sustain us here and allow us to continue doing exactly what we do and making the content that you love. Without further ado, let's get into the questions. There are a lot. I didn't screen them. I just kind of like went through and zipped through all of them. I'm like, okay, well, there's quite a bit this week because I got like a few extra days. I guess like a lot of these are just from after I probably should have already answered some of the questions. And so if I feel like I go through them very quickly, I apologize, but I want to try and get everyone's questions out of the way. Anyways, first question from Shadling. Hello, Shadling. Luka, have you seen the Total War Warhammer 3 Ogre Kingdoms announcement trailer, and why is it so catchy? Well, that's a good question. It is very catchy. If anyone is unfamiliar, they had a little, I don't want to say shanty, but it's a song and dance, and it's just the camaraderie of the ogres hanging out in their caves and their camps, eating very disturbing items of food. Meanwhile, just kind of gallivanting around the lands and just killing and capturing more people or creatures to eat, and they're just very large and in charge, and the song is great too. And then you have Grecius just kind of hanging out there in his little alcove, king of the ogres, and just eating the biggest food. It's just, I don't know, I don't know why it's so catchy. They had good music artists. They had good designers for that. There's, when a little song hits right? That's kind of what they had going on there. Ogre Kingdom's obviously very exciting release for Total War Warhammer 3, kind of fleshing out the missing factions as Ogre Kingdoms, Chaos Dwarves. Obviously the inclusion of Cathay, Nippon, and like if they're going to include them, there's a good chance to include a lot of the other things like the Border Princes, a lot of the more obscure old school Warhammer fantasy stuff that you haven't seen in like 30 years. So be excited for that. Space Commando 99. Luka, I gotta ask the big question. Is Skari an employee of MiniWarGaming now? Yes, he has been for kind of a while now. Months, probably. He lives kind of far away, so he's not here every day. He is here for usually 2 or 3 days of the week, so you'll still get a lot of content out of him. Typically a lot of Age of Sigmar and 40K, but we're trying to convince him to play some Warhammer Army projects with us because he loves Bretonia. He is listed as a content producer. That is fact. Also, I heard from Steve a while back that all of you had done a Path to Glory to build new armies. Steve picked Craftworld Eldar, but what did you choose? I chose Drukhari, and I am kind of the reason it's slowed down because I lost all my push for painting, so I apologize there. Some content that we missed out on. I mean, it's still there. It's still something we could just do down the road one day. It doesn't really mean it's never going to happen. We started with 500 points. I have to paint, realistically, all I have to do is paint an Archon, and so I finished my Archon and finished painting my, what are they called? Scourge, yes. Because I already have my Cabalite Warriors painted, and I have my Raider painted, and they turned out very good, and I'm very proud of them. But the problem is I chose a kind of a complex paint scheme, so it's like it was a lot of work per model, and the problem is with Drukhari, they're very cheap in cost, and the Raiders are like 95 points, and it's just, you need a lot of models, so like, I kind of seen where it was going, I'm like, there's still so much to do, and it was a little discouraging, so I kind of lost momentum on that. But it's not over yet. Captain Obvious. Luka, Josh said you got arrested. What did you do? How was prison? Well, what did I do? What did I do to go to prison? I met a wonderful man named Brorenard or Egbert, one of the two, and he kind of showed me the ropes on how it all went in there. What did I do though? What's a funny thing to be involved with going to prison? I was a filthy meta chaser, and all I did was just say how much I love orcs. Orcs are my favorite army ever. That's why I've always been an orc player for 20 years. I got called out on my crap and got thrown in prison for that. Damn Canada. Next question would be Tomer X50 or Tomorrow X50. Luka, I have a question for thee. My local club is doing a 1,000 point tournament soon, and I am bringing down all my nicely painted terrain to not only have nice armies, but nice boards. My issue is I hate setting out boards as I normally place what looks cool, which normally doesn't make it even. So not symmetrical, not typically what you want for 9th edition. I get what you're saying. My stuff mostly consists of the Imperial sector 6x4 tiled boards and a lot of Games Workshop plastic buildings of various sizes. What is your advice for setting up terrain that is both good looking and also makes it even for both players? Well, I also hate setting up boards because I always want to go for a theme, more of a, not as practical in use, but for 9th edition you do have to have pretty practical boards, and symmetry is kind of key as well. It's good to have technically asymmetrical, but with like an equal amounts of like dense and obscuring and all that good stuff on both sides of the board, but like access to different locations of the deployment zone, if that makes any sense. That way, the attacker defender roll up does matter somewhat, but that's more for like extremely advanced play where that will matter more. Someone might have a perceive like, I really like that building there, I want to put my units on it. That's kind of a simple, sure, like I'll take that side, that matters. But for the most part, a lot of boards are pretty damn close to symmetrical. You should always assign at least one piece of terrain near each player's deployment zone to be dense, either in their territory or not. Even if that thing is not typically like dense, like I got a little bit of terrain around me, like this thing here, this lizardman totem pole. You can just say this is dense for all intents and purposes. It's got like a little, like even though it's like a small piece of terrain, like you can still make it work. It's tall enough to be obscuring, sure, but like it's also tall enough to be dense. You just like, boop, you place it down, and then you can just like tow a vehicle in there, or you could tow like an individual model of some sort of like a small unit, go hide around the footprint of it, and then they'll get some dense terrain. Obviously, you have wild woods, which are great. These are like the de facto go-to like dense terrain. Why do I have these in here? It's because the table was already kind of built with this terrain while I sat down for the show. So it's actually a great opportunity to use this stuff around me. You should always have something like that, and you need good obscuring terrain as well, which could be like a lot of that Sector Mechanica stuff, or the plastic Games Workshop kits you have. They're tall enough to be like, obviously there's a bunch of holes, there's windows to see through it, all of it, but there's gaps in the terrain. But like if it's obscuring, that doesn't matter. And like some of that stuff's perfect too, because it's like very thin and it's like L-shaped or angular, so you can kind of like hide in it and breach through it, because there's typically doors on the still structurally sound sides of the buildings. So that terrain is very good. And heck, if you don't even have things you're not too certain what could be dense, you can just take like clusters of little pieces of terrain, like the Sector Mechanica stuff with like the little welding bots and like the weird like computer robots that just have like little screens on them. You just like kind of cluster them all up together with enough room for models to move around about it, and just call that dense. Dense is very important to have on a table. It's up to the player to utilize it though, but it is incredibly important to utilize. And yeah. So it's just about kind of having things like and then it's important to have terrain that slows movement down as well. Like typically the woods slow down movement, but throw craters down, things like that. It's important to have all of that kind of stuff on the table. Heck, you can even, if you have like swamps at home from like old fantasy sets, you can play on like a swampy kind of board. And this is like, you just use the exact rules for a crater on this, and then you're good to go. Just as a few examples from like random stuff around me. Always have dense stuff. It's important to have things that slow down movement. It's up to the players to remember that all of these pieces of terrain have rules. But you can make anything. You could even say like these woods, like if you have woods like these Sylvaneth Wildwoods, you can just say that they're obscuring. If you don't have any obscuring terrain, you can make anything work as long as it's tall enough and it has a footprint. It's abstract, sure, but it helps make the game a little more balanced, and then it helps even newer players like realize how to utilize the terrain a lot more if you kind of like grind it into their head and be like, the terrain is the most important part of this game. Utilizing terrain properly is how you get better at the game. Like there's like, I'd say there's like 3 things in the game. I've gone off the target here. I understand that, but knowing target priority and the most efficient use for your weapons and units and what there are bad units and codexes, but even those bad units excel in certain situations. So if you really want to use like a weird off-meta list, learn how those units are best utilized. Don't just assume they're there to kill. Like they might be good at screening or pushing enemies back and other things like that. So like learn how to best use your units. Like think outside the box in a lot of these cases, and then learn how to efficiently use your units that are there to kill. Like what is the most efficient thing? Like I will kill, like you're looking at 2 units and you're going to do 5% more damage to one. They're both equally important to kill, but this model will do 5 to 10% more damage to that unit over that unit. That's stuff you need to know and to go for that target over there. And then, of course, how to utilize terrain is probably the most important part of the game, too. And then, knowing your army, but, like, that goes without saying. So, like, you can make any terrain work. You just have to consider the abstract nature of it to make it work. But it is important for 9th, if you are trying to play 9th edition match play games, it's important to realize that. But if you're doing open war or you don't care about terrain as much, then you could look at each other's armies and realize, do we need terrain here? No? Then it's not that big of a deal. It's only when you're trying to play a practice for more competitive games or you want like a tighter, more match play game where you have a lot of trading and back and forth is when you really need to consider terrain. Pellinor, Luka the Bold. I just watched you wipe the death smear off the table. Do you feel the Stormcast are OP or is it just Luka the dice? What did I play against death as? Oh yes, that was me and Dan playing. But that was a weird scenario. That was more like a chess. Well, that was more like a fool's gambit kind of chess match, if anything. Not a great scenario. It's not a bad one because it does incorporate those kind of like, you made one simple mistake, this game is now over, right? I don't think Stormcasts are overpowered. I just think they are good. They're much better than they were before. You can play with a lot of the units in the book. There are some units that are more efficient than other units when you really look at the numbers on the point cost and the output of the damage they do and like the situation they're supposed to, the kind of situation on the table they're supposed to try to achieve, or like the goal they're trying to achieve on the table. I don't think Stormcasts are overpowered. They are just really good stats for their points. There's nothing cheeky about them. There's no, I'm gonna, like, if you do this one thing, I'm gonna move over here and win the game. It's like, I buff up their save, I hit on 3s everywhere, I have really good saves. They suck against mortal wounds. They just fall over dead against mortal wounds, which a lot of the other armies have. That was just a weird match of like, Dan had left a slight opening, and then I had deep struck, made a couple good charges, and won the game. Because this was a scenario, once you control all of the objectives on the table, the game is then over. So that's kind of what happened. Next question by Eisenhorn. My man, I love the name. My man Luka. I've been on a binge of watching the pre-COVID Luka the Dice episodes. Oh wow, going way like 8th edition. And they are great fun. Keep up the great work. For a newer Heresy player, what would be a good place to start collecting it? Ooh, I only have a horde of Marines and looking to expand. Well, if you have all of the Marines, then you're going to want to expand into some armor, typically, and transports too. Honestly, you do not need all the Forge World stuff, especially if you're just playing with a couple of friends who are also new into the Heresy, or they're not as concerned with what models you're bringing, because you could just buy standard 40k Rhinos or standard 40k Land Raiders, Medusas, all of that stuff, and just make them work for they're like the same. They're kind of like the same measurements and like the same kind of footprint on the table. It doesn't really matter what you use, and you could slowly incorporate more of the traditional Heresy stuff in your list if you wanted to. But it depends on your Legion. I don't really know what Legion you play, but I don't want to give you advice on like what the most efficient stuff is either, because I think that kind of gets boring when you stray away from what your Legion plays and then you just kind of bring the good stuff. Like for Space Wolves, for example, I like to play Space Wolves. I like to have a lot of infantry running up the table with Leman Russ and a bunch of Dreadnoughts. It's not the best way to play them, but it's a fun way to play them. But I've been starting to run more transports for my army because, I mean, running up the table in a sci-fi game against guns is typically always a bad idea. So you kind of need that heavy armor to protect them. And then they come out and kill everything. But, say you're playing Iron Warriors, for example, then you want Medusas, you want Whirlwind Scorpiuses, you want basilisks and things that are all barrage artillery, just hammering your opponent to dust before they even have the idea of getting close to you. You've pretty much already tabled them with artillery, and sometimes it doesn't work. I typically, if you already have a lot of Marines, you want to look into the elite units of the Legion you play, and then you want to look into what armor and transports might complement them. Dreadnoughts are always a great addition to the Horus Heresy. They're good fun to play, and they can be rather reliable as well. Flubby that. Hey there, lovely Luka. Have you seen Dune yet? Yes. If so, what did you think about it? Excellent. Do you think big epic space fantasy is making a comeback as a genre? Well, I feel like they've been kind of flubbing the big epic space fantasies recently, or it just hasn't really been a thing for a while, which is, it's kind of true. It is what it is. Dune is obviously a great starting point for them to excel in that genre, or for that genre to come back and reemerge. Dune was for me, Dune was so good. I loved the book. I've always loved the book growing up, and the 1984 movie was, David Lynch's Dune was interesting. I watched it a couple of times, and you just have to appreciate it for what it is. Now, this new Dune, Villeneuve, I can't remember the name. I apologize if I butchered it. It is so good. I think it's like a perfect combination of the characters are the main focus, but you're also keenly aware of how beautiful the vistas are and how amazing the cinematography is in the movie, and just you get a better, and he made the right decision here. Dune is not meant to be one movie. It could have, it definitely two, for the first book, but if they plan on going further into the other novels, then yeah, it's a great starting point. Obviously, you make the first book the two-parters, which kind of looks like what they're doing now, because if you've seen Dune, it's all build up technically is the first one, and you get a lot of the good action in the second half of it, but you can't, the world's so vast and there's so much going on, you can't cram that into one movie. So right away they made the right decision making it multiple movies. And what was I going to say? I lost my train of thought. But anyways, I think it's outstanding. They somehow were able to make it so the characters are the main focus. The most important part of Dune are the characters, but you're still. And they did a good job of explaining what is going on and the politics of it all. And the one thing they kind of shied away from, or the one thing that I thought that they didn't cover super well, is why the Emperor was working with the Harkonnens against Atreides, and no spoilers, that's right off the rip, one of the first things, and that's the typical, everyone knows, it's a political house, in a weird way, kind of feudal style, house warfare, and the idea is there's the Padishah Emperor who rules the galaxy, but underneath him there's all these lords that rule these houses that kind of oversee sections of the galaxy, and the Emperor knows that, and the idea is that they keep the Emperor in check in a way, because their power all together would sweep the Emperor way out of here, and then one of them would become the new Emperor. So the Emperor's got to kind of keep it cool. But the houses fight amongst each other so much, and the Atreides were well loved amongst all the houses except for the Harkonnen. So obviously the political favor of the Atreides worried the Emperor, and thus things like that. But they don't discuss that at all in the movie. I don't think they do really. There's a couple things too. I will criticize, there were a few lines that were pretty important that were kind of for whatever reason very quiet and mumbled under their breath. I almost wish I seen the movie with I typically watch everything with subtitles anyways, but I almost wish there were subtitles on for this movie, because there was a few I knew what they said, I remember from the book and things like that, but I know my friends asked what did they say? I'm it means this or means that, and things. It was cool. I 9 out of 10, 100%. I'd watch it multiple times again before it is released anywhere else. It's so good. But I'm biased though, and I've always had this kind of if I decide I'm going to like something when they announce it, be it a movie, be it a video game, be it whatever, I will automatically like it no matter what. And I've always looked at it as a positive trait, I suppose. If I get hyped for something, I'll never be disappointed. The new Star Wars movies, they came out and I was kind of excited. I'm cool, new Star Wars. But I like to approach it knowing that it's kind of Star Wars is meant for children of the generation. So It's not really meant for adults typically. There's like a few adult jokes here and there, but more or less is meant to impress kids. So like plot holes here and there, like whatever. It doesn't really matter, right? But for me, I like the new Star. I like they weren't like my favorites, but I liked them. I watched them because I went in saying I'm gonna like these no matter what. The new Lord of the Rings series coming out for Amazon. Decided I already like it. No matter what, gonna love it. Lord of the Rings is my favorite movie, favorite novel series, favorite everything. Lord of the Rings is like the best. I love it more than anything. And like this Amazon series coming out, I know a lot of people that are worried, right? Like, why touch something that's so good already? And then for me, it's like, whatever, just more of that is fine. And I've already decided I'm gonna love it, so I know without a doubt it's gonna be amazing. Things like that. I'm not very critical of most things. I would love to see big epic space fantasy make a comeback as long as they do it properly and take its. For me, I personally prefer big epic the space operas and all of that, the galactic operas. I love it when they're taken very slow and meticulous and almost kind of like on the edge of boring, if that makes any sense. So I would like to see them continue that with that genre, just really, because when you're dealing with things on a galactic level, it's so hard to comprehend. Right? You know what I mean? I don't know if that makes any sense. I like it when it's taken very slowly and everything is kind of just fed to you slowly and all the information is there and you can kind of really fall in love with what they're trying to bring to life. Lieutenant Anders, Luka, who's the oldest at Mini Wargaming, age and time served? Maybe Matthew would be the oldest at Mini Wargaming. I'm pretty sure Matthew is exactly 10 years older than I am, like to the day. And him and Steve are a few months apart, but Matthew is a bit older. And Matthew obviously started the cover. So it's Matthew who is the oldest. If you had to rank favorite systems, what's your most fun game system? This can include old editions of any game system. Okay. Have you ever thought about playing a mirror match in either 40K or Sigmar? I'll answer that one, I guess, quickly. I do not like mirror matches. Never have. Maybe comic. I like comical ones of bad armies that are like specifically of older editions of the game, where it'd be like goblins attacking goblins or Skaven on Skaven. Not that Skaven were bad, but they had bad leadership, and then like things could go so wrong for them. So it's kind of funny to see who has the worst luck. Those are fun matchups. But like Necrons on Necrons or Death Guard on Death Guard. Like these perceived good armies against each other. Like not typically my favorite. Though Empire and Empire might be kind of fun. Anyways, my favorite systems, and I could include old editions. I'll try and do 5. My top favorite would have to be Lord of the Rings. But the problem is this always changes as well. So we'll say Lord of the Rings is on top, and then currently the community edition of fantasy, the Warhammer Armies projects, which brings all of the old codexes that never really got updated for 8th edition up to the same standard, and an update to the 8th edition, making it like an 8.5, where they bring back unit strength and they fix up a few of the janky rules, like Steadfast being too powerful, Hordes being unnecessary, kind of like an auto-include, get rid of that garbage, and like fixing the spell scrolls and making them not necessarily auto-includes and things like that. Like really brought the edition together, and kudos to the creator of it, Matthias, because you were able to also bring the flavor of all the armies from all the older editions and incorporate them into this new edition of the game as well. So like it's like, I don't know if it's because it's just different and it's changed is why I like it so much, but I just love this edition so much. And if you haven't checked it out, it's all free on the Warhammer Army Projects.blogspot. You could check it out. And it's all the PDFs are there, all the army books are there, all the old lores include all the old named characters. If you used to play like the Undead Army back in 5th edition and you had all the cool named characters, well, that's all back essentially, and you could like play all of that stuff again. And if you have a friend that you haven't played fantasy with in a while and you just didn't like 8th edition, or you wanted something new, I bid you check this out. Like you would not regret it. And so I'll go Lord of the Rings, Warhammer Army Projects, Horus Heresy, 3rd, and then 4th and 5th. I haven't really done editions. 7th edition Warhammer 40K without the codexes, without the detachments and the codexes, just combined arms detachments. Those were always really fun. Just because it's like Horus Heresy, but you have all the armies in there now. So you have like the Xeno stuff. That's kind of cool. And then 5th, Fifth. What would I really like to play for the fifth one? It's difficult because I don't want to say like another edition of another like Warhammer, like Fantasy 7th edition or something. So a fifth game. Can't think of one right now. What do I play? What's cool that I really like that I play? I mean, like if I was to be honest about like Age of Sigmar and 9th edition 40k, they're cool, but they just like kind of pale in comparison to. I've always been more of like, oh man, what's the term now? There's a term for like older player who just like it's almost like a long beard as the dwarf. Oh man, there's a word for it. And you guys know exactly what I'm talking about. It starts with a G. Not Grumbler. Grognard. That's what it was. Kind of a Grognard in a way, I guess. I don't like to admit that. And I play tons of 9th edition Warhammer 40k and a lot of Age of Sigmar 3rd edition as well. But I've always preferred the minutia of the older editions of the games and things that are out of your control. And I look at Warhammer 40k and Age of Sigmar as very tight, competitive versions of these tabletop war games. But if I want a game that'll naturally tell when you want a game that you can just pick up with your friend and play, and something narrative or something wild is going to happen just out of the blue, and without even forcing it to happen, you're looking at older editions of Warhammer 40k, Warhammer Fantasy, and things like that. And that's typically what I like, because like no game is ever the same, and that is beautiful. I played a game of Bretonia where I was playing against Skaven in the Warhammer. It's just a game, Bretonia versus Skaven, nothing fancy, no narrative setup or anything. But I had a damsel in a unit of Grail Knights. She miscast right away, killed the entire unit of Grail Knights, and then I was getting hammered by Warp Lightning Cannons the entire game. And all I had left was a Bretonian Lord, a Bretonian Paladin, which is the banner bearer, the hero level of Lord, and a couple of Knights of the Realm left. And they went through the entire Skaven army on their own with good enough dice to get them there. That typically would never happen in like an 8th edition game of Warhammer Fantasy, or hard to pull that off in 40k and Age of Sigmar, because it's a progressive scoring system. So if you just table your opponent, they can't score points anymore, they lose the game. And that's fine for competitive stuff. But these games, these older games, are just kind of kill each other and just let the dust settle and then see what happens. And it was a lot of trading back and forth, and it was good fun. And then things run away. I miss old morale systems mostly. Fifth game, I don't know. It'll be Age of Sigmar or 40k 9th. Age of Sigmar 3rd or 40k 9th edition. One of the two. I bounce back and forth between the two of them. They're both fine. They're both damn good and fun to play. But you don't always want to play a competitive game. And thus I like to go to the other editions of the other games I like to play, because because I play so many games and such a variety of games, which I'm very lucky, by the way, so I appreciate literally all the supporters allowing me to do that. Without you, I wouldn't be able to do that. Know that I love you. But those games are so competitive that I don't think they play well at a more narrative level. Like Crusade is fun, Path to Glory is fun, but you have to augment them, I think, to make them more interesting, because there's like nothing exciting really happens. If I'm going to be blunt, I don't think anything really exciting happens. You don't have these epic challenges. You don't have characters challenge each other and then big random turnarounds, and where they're literally forced to fight each other because of the rules, or you don't have vehicles getting like you have this cool dreadnought that's so upgrading you're relying on, and then like one guy has like a random melt gun. It's like, ah, crap, melt gun around the corner, boom, rolls hits, penetrates, destroys him in one shot, and then your whole plan is thrown to the wind, and then you have to come up with something on the spot. Or heck, maybe you lost because of it, but sometimes that happens, right? That hero with the melted gun won the game on his own, and then who would have thought that could have happened? I know, I realize a lot of people don't like that, but I've always really enjoyed that. And like, it's not the one thing I like about that the most is because a lot of the aspect of the game is out of your control, there's no real reason to get mad, because it's not like you made a mistake, right? This guy just walks up, he rolled really well, and you lost something. Like, some crazy thing happened, and maybe my vampire gets killed by a spell that I used everything at my disposal to unbind that spell. I did not unbind it. The spell resolves, rolls like a 6 into a 6 into a 6. My vampire dies, my whole army crumbles, I lost the game on turn 1. I'm like, okay, well, that sucks. But I couldn't do anything to stop that, so I tried everything I could, and sometimes that happens. And that's the stuff I really kind of miss and appreciate. But because I have access to all those older games, when I want to play something competitive, I look towards 40k 9th edition and Age of Sigmar 3rd edition. And if I want to play something more loosey-goosey and for fun, I look literally anywhere else, because I don't think those editions do it very well. But that's just my opinion, and opinions can be wrong. So, yeah, that's my, sorry, that's kind of like something I'm passionate about, I suppose. So I took a little bit longer on that question, so I apologize. But I think it's important to say to speak my mind and be transparent about that stuff. But anyways, Grandmo. I wish I could play more Lord of the Rings too. I should say that. Grandmo, is anyone at MiniWarGaming going to review the new Warzone book? Probably not, just because we're very busy right now, and it doesn't really affect us. Like the orcs got a huge buff in it. Wow, great, awesome orcs. Ooh, we love orcs. And I don't know. Sorry, it sounds dismissive, but no, honestly, we just didn't have the time, I guess. So I guess I don't know. Yeah, just not the time for it. Maybe the next one, but we'll always do codex reviews at the least. There's that, but sometimes we skip the narrative supplements, or the supplements, I should say, because there's always like a match play supplement in there. Doug Peacock, hey Luka, how do you view the future of the Realm of Death? Strong, actually, some potential, because they actually have the least amount of armies in Age of Sigmar out of all of the grand orders, being it Order, Destruction, Chaos, and Death. There's only 4 armies. There's Nighthaunt, Soulblight, Alseok Bone Reapers, and Flesh Eater Courts, whereas like all the other factions have very many armies, so it leaves room for something new and fun to come out, like the Vampire Coast, maybe like a new army for Age of Sigmar, where it's just like pirate vampires, guns, and like it'd be like black powder and support from a ship nearby, and pirate like hit and run tactics. I'd be very excited for something like that. But then again, they come up with a lot of creative things for the undead, so I would expect a new undead book at some point this edition, maybe towards the end of it, I don't know. But the updates to the death books are always fun. I've always been attracted to them because I always found they had the most kind of shenanigan-y rules, be it through morale or through reanimating, reincarnating, and like all this crazy stuff. So I've always liked death. Death is always on the up and up, in my opinion. Even when it's down, it's always on the up and up. Supposing everything continues to the nadir, it seems like there is a time limit on the survival of the mortal realms. Oh, the realm of death. Sorry, I meant you meant literally the realm of death in Age of Sigmar. I thought you meant like generally the death armies in the game. My apologies. Supposing everything continues to the nadir, it seems like there is a time limit on the survival of the mortal realms. If you were in charge of the uninventing or the verting the flow of magic in the realm of death, then how would you go about it? I would not. I would let them all die horribly, and then coalesce into one entity, one planet-like entity that looks a lot like our Earth, and that has all of the factions and all the races in their own like little unique areas, and they all war amongst each other, and we could call it the Old World. Historical Age of Sigmar. If you were in charge, I'm not too sure. How would you go about it? Well, I mean, you could always, I'm sure they'll like MacGyver something together from the Order factions. They like to historically not change the narrative all that much. Even though you might think it has changed quite a bit, it's always like a give or take thing, and like, ooh, like Gilliman's back, blah, 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 all this stuff, nothing really happens. But lots of things happen, but like nothing really happens, I would have liked to see a much more dramatic change in the narrative when there is a good, maybe it would have like upset the narrative too much, but there's good opportunity there to like, Gilliman comes back, maybe the Lion comes back, and then there's an actual split in the Imperium. They're not necessarily enemies, but they don't work together that well anymore, and then, they have their own fronts and their own, like, that'd be hard to do, but that'd be kind of funny. And then, the other factions come back and all this stuff. They just don't change it up too much, which is, I guess I'll be honest, I never pay attention to the narrative of, I like the old lore and the things that have happened in the past, that's cool, but when the new stuff comes out, I never pay much attention to it, because I've just been, I guess, around for a while, and I've always been disappointed in the past, where I'm like, oh, that's, like, I remember getting excited, like the Silent King came back for the Necrons. I'm like, that's interesting, that's very cool. I read about it, I'm like, why did he come back? Okay, that's why he came back. And cool, he's back. Now what? Nothing really, right? Like, it doesn't, like, it's just cool to have him back. It's cool to have these big characters, but ultimately it doesn't really change too much of that dynamic of what's going on. Because again, it's a galactic scale, right? So, and then look at the mortal realms for Age of Sigmar. It's kind of in its weird way a galactic scale, because the realms are like seemingly endless, and there's 8 of them, and they're all interconnected, and it's just massive. These massive armies could like, you could spend an entire lifetime walking from one end of the realm to the other, and they just keep growing, and it's wildly big. It's hard to like really, like, no matter how big an event is, it's kind of minuscule in the grand scheme of things. So that in a way kind of always bothered me. So I never really paid attention to the modern narrative stuff of either technically Age of Sigmar or Warhammer 40k. Whereas like things like the Old World, because it's so small and condensed, like even minor events had a rather large impact on the game. But then again, it was harder for the players to form their own narrative because all of a sudden, if you do like a massive tile-based campaign, and there's like an Empire player, a Bretonnia player, a Vampire Count player, and like a Norscan player, all of a sudden, like say the Norscan player starts he just takes over all of the Empire player loses everything, and all of a sudden, well, how does this affect the narrative? Now the Norscans own like a good chunk of the Empire, and what happens there, right? So it's harder to do things like that, right? Because it's such a smaller location, I guess. It's harder to justify the big narrative changes. Miso for the next question. Luka, still no Magic the Gathering content from you. So disappointed. Let's see some draft on MTG Arena or perhaps a Commander game. Would it be great? You mean like a stream? I typically, like me and my friends play Commander a lot on TTS, but I mean, that's just kind of casual. Like, I mean, I've always been thinking about streaming, but I mean, we'll get there one day. Also, have you A, seen Dune? Yes. And B, ever heard of the Dune board game? Oh, absolutely, dude. The Dune board game is amazing. I have a little bit of a gripe with it, but it is an amazing board game. The movie is awesome, and the board game is amazing, and is a cult favorite amongst board gamers from back in the 80s. Yeah, well, they recently reprinted it. Not a new edition, but kind of samey, but like just like more modernized. It's not, I wouldn't say streamlined. It's just, Dune is like one of the best board games ever made. And like, if you are a big board game fanatic and you've not played Dune, 100% go check it out. But it's more of it's like a longer, grindier game. It won't take you 12 hours to play it, but it will take quite a few hours to get through it. And that's even with experienced players. Would be cool to see you guys play sometime. It only requires 6 players. Yep. There are some playthroughs on YouTube if you want to see how it plays. Best dude. No, dude, like, oh man. Dude. I love Dune. My only gripe with it is you can, like, an experienced player can suddenly win early on in the game. It's one of those games where, like, if you control certain aspects of the board at a certain point in the game, then the game is over. You have won. You have control of Arrakis, and you've won the Dune board game. And you get to play as like the Fremen, the Atreides, the Harkonnen, the Spacing Guild, the Bene Gesserit have a cool way to win. Actually, I like because they can like predict. They can win through the normal means, or they can predict which player will win on what turn. And if they make that prediction correctly, it's a secret prediction. They actually win instead of that player, which is hilarious. But they're like one of the more advanced factions, so you don't play them unless you have 6 players, I think. And then who did I say? There's Fremen, Harkonnen, Atreides, Bene Gesserit, Spacing Guild. Did I say Fremen? Yeah, I think that's the 6 players right there. And then there's like events, the Sandworms come. It's a great game. It's a great game. Couldn't recommend it enough. Dorn Jr. I feel the same way about CSM. I collect all Imperium and blah, 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 blah. Okay. Mandig, Luka. I know it was a while ago, but I loved how you took viewer lists for several Necron battle reports. It was a great engagement with the fans and seemed like a lot of fun. Getting out of the old comfort zone. It's true. Question. You are a Necron overlord who wakes up from your deep sleep in the 41st millennium. What has changed about your code in the meantime, and what is your plan post-reanimation? Ooh, I'd love to imagine I kept all my faculties and I didn't go completely insane. And I would view... I always liked the general Necron overlord mentality. I would like to think I would have some of my own qualities. I wouldn't be overly arrogant. I wouldn't underestimate the other factions maybe I would underestimate. I definitely would underestimate the factions because I'm like, I literally can't die, like things like that, right? And my armies can't die, and good luck killing us. Like, you think you're cool? We ruled this galaxy 60 million years ago. That's how cool we are. I would probably be a little arrogant. I would like to imagine I would remain, control my free will, not have any weird issues with my I can't think of the words right now, but I would no mental issues, no deranged nature to my overlord here. I would be honorable combatant, and I wouldn't really respect my enemies until I did, if that makes any sense, until they proved they were worthy. Typical Necron overlord stuff. And I would imagine I would have worked well with the other Necrons of the past, and I would continue to do so after awakening. And I would gather all my homies, my cryptechs. I'd have good relations with my lords and my cryptechs. And I would I suppose I still have an entire army of slave soldiers in the form of Necron warriors, so that's suspicious. But hey, man, it is what it is. It's the Dark Millennium for a reason, I guess. But what would change about my code? I would hope nothing would change. I would like the honorable combatant I was before, and I would like to see that through later on. But if I was to go insane, well, maybe I'd just be bloodthirsty. Probably. But I like to imagine I followed the typical path of the Overlord, but not too arrogant. I mean, maybe at first, but I would get humbled. I would probably get humbled at some point. Shadling, hey Luka. Now that Maggiekin have been announced as the next book, glorious. I was wondering what you think needs to be updated from Maggiekin, and what new stuff would you like to see? I personally was hoping for a cheaper Mortal Battle Line unit, perhaps a unit similar to Poxwalkers. Nurgle Endless Spells would have been nice as well. Well, Nurgle Endless Spells, without a doubt, you're right there. That'd be a nice change. And I was always surprised they never got a cult-like model for the Maggiekin, whereas like the Blades of Khorne have the Reavers, the Hedon Knights have their weird archer things that run around. They're kind of like a cult equivalent model. Tzeentch has the, God, what are they called? It has a scroll. They shoot like little flames out. They're cultist equivalents too. The only one who didn't was Nurgle. They're like a more elite build. I would have liked to see something exactly like a Poxwalker, like a plague zombie, essentially. Like they're not undead, but they are corrupted by Nurgle, and they would have human-like stats. They'd move 4 or 5 inches. They just walk around with improvised weapons, and they would probably have a feel no pain like ability, and they would just be, it can augment them through magical powers, make them do mortal wounds or something. That would be a great addition to the book, and I think that'd be nice for them. The Blight Kings can keep their wounds. They definitely need rend on their weapons because they're worthless right now. They're exploding 6s to hit things, a weird mechanic that needs to be changed. That could be like every 6 hit is 3 hits, or like D6 plus or D3 plus 1 hits. I don't know what they would do with that. If they really want to keep that mechanic, they can. The Feel No Pain, like either get rid of the Feel No Pain character, the Harbinger, or somehow incorporate it that he does something different and then everything gets the Feel No Pain instead, or balance it so that they always have it, because it always sucked having to need 1 or 2 of those characters in that army. Absolutely it sucked, and it was just get rid of that aspect of the army there. Keep the Corrupting the Land thing, that's kind of cool. Maybe update it a little bit, I don't know. Summoning the Demons is cool, that works out well. Make it so you can do something else with the corruption maybe, as opposed to just summoning. That might be fun, but then summoning is just fine on its own. Just update, give the Blight Kings rend, give them different artifacts, different different types of Blight King house traits or Legion traits, whatever you want to be. And I think that'll probably be it. I'm sure they'll blow it out of the water. They'll surprise me with what they do. But they don't actually need a lot to get better. They just need more rend on their attacks. They need to be able to do mortal wounds, and they need like a weird cult-like model, and then their own spells. You kind of already got a couple of those hit the nail on the head on them. I'll be playing a lot of them when they come out though, because they were always one of my favorite armies. They just, once 3rd edition came out and they lost access to their Blight Sis battalion, they just became kind of, in my mind, worthless and like not really worth playing. They felt kind of bad. Vigor Mortis. Luka. I've been watching you guys for a few years now. Thank you. But this is the first time I've commented. Oh, well, welcome. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little bit. I'm going to have some of my coffee. Excuse me. I talk too much. Thank you for all the great content. I was curious why you never use Belladama and Radukar the Beast in a Verco's Dynasty list. Well, I'll tell you the secret to that one, Vigor Mortis, because I don't freaking have them. I want to use them. I very much so want to use them. Very much so badly, but I don't have them. That's my favorite dynasty. It is also my favorite dynasty. The strength of the wolf is the pack. The strength of the pack is the wolf. And was wondering if you could run a list like that in one of your battle reports. I would freaking love to. I'm actually going, after this, I'm going to work on getting those models. I've been procrastinating that for a bit, and you have reminded me to do that, so thank you very much, actually. I will get on that as soon as I possibly can. I will literally go upstairs and order them right now. Well, once I'm done this. And I don't think I'm going to forget. So, Vigor Mortis, because of you, there will be Radukar the Beast and the Belladama in future battle reports. Ashnak the Black, Luka. First, let me say thank you for all. Thank you all for putting out awesome videos. It really helped me get into the hobby. Secondly, are we going to see more Vengorian Lords or Avengorialis builds in the future? Yes. the Stormcast Tournament book came out and no one really wanted to play them. And I figured I'd do them some justice and have some fun and, showcase that because they're good, they're fun to play. And I like what they did with that book. So I want to go through all the Storm hosts and then play my favorite one a couple more times. Then I'm going to go probably shelve it again for a while, if I'm going to be honest, and then focus on Death again. Absolutely, there'll be more Vengorian Lord list. Plus Skari's been playing a lot of Soulblight Gravelords, and then we had the joke, like it was literally like every battle report for Age of Sigmar for a longer period of time than it should have been were like Soulblight Gravelords, because it was like only me and Skari recording the game, and I wasn't gonna put them down because they are my favorite army book, and then Skari really was attracted to them as well. Literally everyone in the studio wanted to play them. It was one of the most interesting book releases they've ever done for Age of Sigmar, at least in-house. It grew the most appeal in-house. Tian Ventar. Oh, there's two here, sorry. Luka, you are amazing, but for real now, if I'm from overseas and I come visit, must I bring my own models? Because I'm just afraid that it can break. So what must I do in this case? Just a question. You can message Josh at MiniWarGaming.com and work it out. He does all the scheduling, all the guests, and discusses issues like that with the guest. Right now our policy is, because we've had guests in the past come by and borrow our stuff because they didn't want to bring their own for whatever reason, traveling, didn't want to break it, maybe it's kind of a pain in the butt, borrow our stuff, but like it turns out that they had no idea what they were like borrowing, and they didn't even know what the models looked like, so they like kind of lied to us, and they kind of made subpar content, and we ended up playing like solitaire with ourselves because we had to control everything they did. So we wanted to make sure everyone had their own armies, they painted them themselves, that way they're invested in their own stuff and they know what their stuff does, and therefore they'll have better battle reports because of it. Now, not saying that was everyone, but it happened enough that it was kind of a pain. So we had to make our own policy where you must bring your own models or have your own models that are ready to go already. But you never know. There's been a couple times where we have like guests that have come by that we've already know how to play the game, and they just borrow our stuff and it's fine. Like Kenny just borrows our stuff all the time. So, but Kenny, I literally pick him up on my way in, and he lives like just down the road from me. Sorry, another question from Tian Ventar. Would you love to do a Adeptus Mechanicus narrative campaign? A suggestion for this can be the forces from the distant Lost Forge world of Griffon 4 that was destroyed, and how it follows after this event, or alternatively, call in his forces to go to a tomb world. Mic drop. Well, I've always liked the idea of Admech versus Necrons in a campaign setting. Even like a crusade setting would be fun. I always am down for campaigns only if they include a tile-based system. I typically like more players involved too, but I like the idea of like the two main forces are these two, and then like the Necrons and the Admech, but then there could be like other splinter factions that are supporting either side in this tile-based campaign, but they kind of play for themselves in their own way too. I don't know why I'm always just tile-based campaign sell me 100% every time. And then the Crusade rules are kind of cool to compound on that tile-based campaign setting. But yeah, Admech versus Necrons is a classic matchup. That's always a good time. So like without a doubt, that's always a good idea. We're getting there one day. We are getting there. Thasis, or Thasis. Luka, you're amazing. And I love your Necron fleet for Battlefleet Gothic. What can we expect? When can we expect more BFG? Soon, actually, because Steve and I want to do a Tyranid Necron campaign that involves BFG, involves Warhammer 40k, and I think it involves, get hyped because it could be a really cool campaign, but I'm not too sure when we're going to have time to start that. It might be soon. It might be a couple months out. I'm not too sure on that. But that will incorporate Battlefleet Gothic, and yes, it'll incorporate some Necron fleet. Super good stuff in BFG. Boo-doo-na-doo-doo. Luka. Is there any Xenos race floating around in the Warhammer 40k lore that you'd like to see brought to the tabletop? Well, there's like a lot of weird, obscure ones that are just none that my gut tells me no. I can't think of anyone right now that I'm like, that's really cool, I want to see that. Because there's a lot, and they're just all over the place. There's like weird brain bug things, dude. Those things are kind of creepy. But, I mean, like, do they have enough to justify a model line is always the question. Any that could make a whole army/faction, or more so just units to add to existing armies? Thanks. Bad. Well, that's a good question. My gut says no, so I apologize. But there are a couple cool ones. But you're right on the supplementing armies that already exist. That is something that they could probably pull off a little bit easier than bring out an entire new faction. But there are enough out there that they could also do that and then just make up new units for that faction that have always existed, right? They've done it in the past. And I mean, at some point, like, when is there enough armies in the game? When is there not enough armies in the game? There's quite a bit in 40K right now, but I mean, the game is very old as well and has had lots of years to grow and figure out how those armies fit into the narrative and how they influence it and how they're always going to be relevant. You know what I mean? So to add something new to it, well, that could be complicated, but it might be easy. I don't know. I'm no game designer, but there's always possibilities for it. Michael McDonald, 646. Luka, my Scottish nature says you're nae bad. You're not bad. You're not bad. Question. Thank you. Thank you. I'm glad I rubbed off positively on you. Question. Would you ever experiment Warhammer 40K with a D8 system instead of a D6? Gut feeling says this would be good. Example. Would define really light armor infantry to super heavily armored tanks. A Bulgrin should not have better armor than a Lord of Skulls. That is fact. So if you want an older like you go all the way back to Rogue Trader. You go all the way back to Rogue Trader. They use the entire kind of skew of polyhedral dice. You had like D2s to D100s in that bad. I think they had D100s in that roll. I know they went up to D20s. I think they went all the way up to D100s, which is the 2D10 roll, but. Or hell, if you have a D100, you can roll that too. There's a lot of those floating around. But I agree. The game would be better with, well, I mean, look at Apocalypse. If you've not looked at Apocalypse, there's a rule. It's like your units die simultaneous at the same time. So you like apply blast markers to units. If they get hit a little bit, they get a little small blast marker. If they get hit a lot, they get a big blast marker. And then every unit has a save on them. Like Abaddon has a 3-up save, but his rule is, I don't know what it's called. He's the War Master. He always rolls his saves on a D12, no matter what. So if he's got like so I guess I should cover like, if you have big blast markers, you take your save on a D12 for every big blast marker you have, and then for every little blast marker, it's the other way around. You take your save on a D6 if you have a big blast marker, and you might have a 7-up save, so like that means no saves against big blast markers, but some units have 5-up saves or 6-up saves, so boom, you D6 it. But if you have little blast markers on you from smaller arms fire or just smaller hits in general, you get to roll a D12 on that save. So all of a sudden you're like 7-up saves and your 4-up saves and 5-up saves are a lot more impactful on a D12. Then you have things like Cultists who just have like a 10-up save, I think, or something really minor. So like they only save on D12s and they still don't likely save all that much. But then Abaddon has a 3-up save always on a D12, which is very powerful. But I think the game would greatly benefit with the inclusion of more dice. I would love to see Terminator armor go back to, Terminators used to have a 3-up armor save, like power armor, but back then it was called tactical dreadnought armor, and it had a rule that said you take it's like power armor, but you roll 2d6 and add the results together, and then any roll of 3+ will succeed. So imagine imagine failing a 2d6, like your literal double ones is a fail. But back then they had, like now in 8th and 9th edition, you had a modifier on AP on all your shots. Bolt guns had AP1, so if you're getting shot by bolt guns, you had a 4-up save on 2d6. I think a las cannon was -6. So you had a 9-up save on 2d6, which is not that unlikely, against a las cannon. I think a 5-up invulnerable save is more likely now than a 2d6 9-up roll, but I actually can't remember the math on that. But anyways, you get the idea. I think the game was a lot more fun back then, but it was harder to balance, and and there was also a lot fewer models on the table and a lot fewer dice being thrown back when they had things like that. So that's obviously something to consider there. But I think the game would benefit greatly from just throwing in random weird dice, but it'd be a lot heavier toll on the design team to make that actually work and keep the game as competitive as it is now. I think it would mess that up and completely screw that over. But heck, you could even have turners with a 3-up save on 2 dice and then just have all those modifiers in there. And you can still roll it pretty quickly too, because like if you're getting shot by a bolt gun and you it'd still slow the game down a lot. They say they're AP1 or AP2 on the bolt guns based on the doctrine. You just roll. Let's say you have 10 wounds, and you get rid of their invulnerable. This is also a great way to get rid of invulnerable saves as well. You don't need invulnerable saves in the game anymore if you use a multiple dice system for armor saves. That's a bonus there. If you hate invulnerable saves, then you just incorporate more dice into the game, different size and scale of dice, then you can kind of mess around with that a little bit more. Because all of a sudden you could have like a power armor could be like a 2-up save on a d6, but Terminator armor could be a 3-up save on 2d6, and then the last cannon is just AP like 3 or 4, so then their save is augmented like that. You don't need the invulnerable save anymore. And then you just, if you have to do 10 saves on a Terminator, you just roll, and it's AP2, you have a 5-up save, you just roll 10 dice, and for every 5-up, you just take those out of the pool, for every 4-up, actually, you just take them out of the pool, because you know if you had a second d6 to that, you would automatically pass. So then there's like 4 fails. That's where it gets a little more nuanced, and there's like a 1, a 2, a 3, and like a 2. And then you have to roll another d6 with those, and then like on the 1, you need to roll 4 to pass, and on the 2s, you need to roll 3s to pass, and all that kind of stuff. You get what I'm saying. But it could work. It could work, and I think the game would benefit greatly, but I would have to heavily augment the rules to even incorporate something like that. There'd be a lot of work, and then there'd be a lot of judgment, and a lot of people just saying, why not just play the game as meant to be played? If you want to play something like this, go play 2nd edition. Just go, and then for yourself, asking the question, you can just go and get the 2nd edition rulebook, and you can just play with all your models now. Some of them wouldn't exist, like Primaris Marines, but you can just say they're tactical Marines with a bolt gun, and whatever the scale doesn't matter if your opponent is playing with the same scale, and then you could just play with this weird spectrum of dice, and then you might even have a lot more fun. You could intimately learn 2nd edition and intimately know 9th edition, even though there's a lot to 9th edition. That's constantly changing. 2nd edition never changes. So if you don't want to play competitive games anymore, like, let's play some 2nd edition, and you get all those weird dice, and you get like this weird, like the facings of your guys matter, and like shields, or like this weird like save after save. It's a cool concept. Anyways, Roland Gred 13. Luka the Lovely. I love your enthusiasm and upbeat attitude. I was wondering if there was any interest floating around MiniWarGaming about Conquest, the last argument of kings. Asked Josh last week and told me to ask you. Oh, yeah, Conquest was like a thing Steve and I were heavily invested in back when we first seen it at Adepticon like 3 years ago, I believe. Could have been 4 years ago now. I don't know. Time flies. Yeah, so it's hard to keep track of all that. But Conquest was a very interesting game that we were very interested in. But the problem is it took a little too long to roll out. And sometimes we have shorter. This is also when we were kind of burnt out of 8th edition, and there wasn't really any brighter horizons other than going back to older editions, but it was kind of hard to convince people to do that. It was only really me and Steve that wanted to do it, and all that stuff. But Conquest looked very promising because it was all old school fantasy fans that were making it. It was amazing models, good rule set, but I think honestly it took a little too long to roll out. They had to redo the rule book, or they had to redo a couple of things. The models were all good to go, but there was some issue with the shipping, and it got delayed, and interest waned, and then we kind of forgot about it. But, and if I'm going to be honest, I guess, with like the old world on the horizon and our newly reinvigorated interest in the Warhammer Armies project, all the work we're doing with the live shows, and 40K and Age of Sigmar content we're still trying to pump out, it might realistically not be the time for it. And I'm trying to I'm right now trying to struggle to get the time to play some Lord of the Rings battle reports. So it's kind of difficult, like, if I'm to be honest. It is very interesting, but realistically, I don't know how we'd go about incorporating that. I'm going to go to YouTube to answer a couple more questions here, because I actually got through all of those questions somehow. Star Wars Legion's a good game too. That could have been maybe I think I might like 40K more than that. I don't know. Is there any questions for me here on YouTube? Luka, call me solo. Ooh. Do you have a favorite wargaming memory? Funny moment in a game, against all odds occur, or just a great social interaction? You are by far the best member of MiniWarGaming, and if I grow up to be like you, that might be okay. Wow. That's very nice. Oh, thank you. Gosh, I don't even know what to say. Do I have a favorite wargaming memory? Trying to think. There's a lot of funny memories that I've had. There was the one time that I was playing against the Imperial. It was back when I was more of a cheese lord with my Necrons in 7th edition, because before I worked here, and I only got to play once a week, and I had a list I really liked, and I just wanted to play that list all the time. It wasn't really a cheese. It's not like I manipulated the rules at all. I just used really efficient units all the time together. So I used to really like my Lich Guard brick with Auric and the Diviner. And at the time, the Lich Guard had their shields, which were just storm shields. They made them they lost the ability to redirect fire. This was 7th edition. because in 5th edition they had a 4-up invulnerable save, but they would redirect fire if they rolled a 6 to save, and then the shot had come from within 12 inches, they could deflect it back at the initial shooter. So like melta-guns were hilarious because they were 12-inch range, or like rapid-fire plasma guns because they'd have to be within 12 to rapid-fire. So people would always like, well, I'm not going to get in rapid-fire range of the Lich Guard, and then I don't want to get hit back. So like they would automatically give up half their shots and all this kind of cool stuff. But then in 7th edition, they made their shields a storm shield, so 3+ invulnerable save. Orkin the Diviner was a Cryptek. He was a Chronomancer named Cryptek, who was the most gifted Chronomancer. He could see far into the future, see far into the past. He had great gifts of prescience. So he had a rule that any Necron unit he was joined to, because you joined characters to units back in that edition, they got to reroll saving rolls of 1. And he also increased the reanimation, because he was a Cryptek, they had the Technomancer ability, I believe, what it was called, and it would increase the reanimation protocol rolls by 1 of the unit they were a part of. And then I would play the Decurion detachment, which incorporated the Core 1, which any models in that Core 1 got to increase their reanimation protocols by rolls by 1 as well. So what this meant was you could only cap it out at 4+. It was a 5-up base, and it capped out at 4+, but they got +2 to it. And anything that caused instant death against reanimation protocols would lower the roll by 1, make it a little bit harder to pull off. So with Orkin in that unit, they would always have a 4-up no matter what, even against instant death. And if you were near the Overlord, I believe you got to reroll 1s on that Feel No Pain, the reanimation protocol as well, which was just a Feel No Pain back then. So I would always put the Overlord with that unit too, so it was like a very expensive Death Star, because I'd put a Lord in there with the Veil of Darkness artifact. So I'd have a Lord, an Overlord, and Orkin the Diviner in this Death Star that would teleport to the middle of the table, turn 1, because as the Veil of Darkness was, they would disappear from where they are and reappear, deep striking anywhere on the table as a giant unit, and then they would just sit there, and they had a 3+ invulnerable save, rerolling 1s, and there was no mortal wounds, mind you, in this edition, so there was no way to get through that. There was no way to get through that invulnerable save, and then you reroll 1s, and then if I somehow failed an invulnerable save, they're T5, so they're kind of hard to hurt to begin with, and then I have a 4-up Feel No Pain afterwards of reanimation protocol, and I could reroll the 1s on that as well. So it was next to impossible to kill one of these Lich Guard. Then on top of that, I had a Overlord in there with a War Scythe. I had a Lord in there with a War Scythe. So they're going around strength 7, AP2 armor bane, killing kind of anything they come across. They're my anti-vehicle, anti-armor guys. And they have like, yeah, they were crazy too. So my favorite moment is not that unit, but in a game I played against an Imperial Fist player where he's playing a chapter that utilized the Imperial Fist rules, and he had 3 Vindicators. And they had a rule where they could combine their shells to fire, like they would all put their shells in one area, and then it would convert to a giant blast, strength 10, like AP2, like all these weird rules. And he placed it on the thing. I'm like, whoa, 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 you'll get way more out of that if you just hammer that unit with the 3 individual Vindicator blasts. He's like, oh, you're right. So he lines up all the blasts on that unit, and I kid you, it was like 32 strength 10 AP2 wounds that all caused instant death. And he was just so, like, he wasn't very aware of the Necron rules. And I'm like, that's cool, that's cool. So it was like, I roll my 32 dice. I get, the 1s and 2s. I fail a third of them, and, half of them are 1s. And I reroll the 1s, and I pass 2/3 of those. And like, in the end, it was like, I remember it being something like there was only like 4 or 5 wounding hits. He's like, oh my gosh, you could reroll 1s on your invulnerable saves? I'm like, yeah. And then I had the 4-up Feel No Pains rolling 1s. I think I lost 1 Lich Guard to 3 Vindicators firing direct hit blasts on them. And he actually just conceded because we just re-racked. It was fine because he's like, I should have never shot them. I should have just ignored them and then hammered your backlines with the Vindicators. And I'm like, yeah, it's probably a better idea actually. Like, all things considered. Hit my warriors, hit my weird ghost arcs, all that stuff. So we just kind of, all we did was like take the shooting back on his turn, because all I did was I deep struck there, rearranged, but he was just so shocked. He was just, I lost the game, because like he just wasted all his firepower into them and all this stuff, and it was, that was this, like a lot of his heavier firepower. He wasn't upset about it. He was just shocked at the durability of that. It was like, it had to be one of the most durable units in the game at that time. And that's a cool memory. There's a couple other times too where I played a big Apocalypse game of Horus Heresy with a guest who had brought a Warlord Titan and a Warhound Titan and a lot of Custodians, and I had Lorgar, the Primarch of the Wordbearers, with the Galvorback unit. Kind of just, they walked out of their transport, they killed a bunch of stuff, and then the Warlord turns at them, and I had like Lorgar transfigured. He was all buffed up with psychic powers. Same idea of prescience, where he could like reroll. He used precog and he could reroll his invulnerable saves, and he was kind of a tough guy. So like the Warlord aims his Sun Fury Plasma at Lorgar, and his unit just boom, boom, boom. It's like a giant apocalyptic barrage that lands all over the place. He fired, like, I can't remember what the other arm weapon was now that I think about it. He had the Apocalypse missile launchers, and they all shot at Lorgar's unit. He just tanks it all, rerolling his invulnerable save and just dodging the fire, and it was very dramatic, and that was a cool moment too. A couple of those are a few examples. I have a few more too, but like I could go on forever about that. Ooh. There's just disagreements by people saying, like, without a doubt, like, it's kind of a bold statement. It's just comments saying, like, 9th edition not being a balanced game. Now, I will agree. I think the orcs skew that a little bit, but they're usually very quick with the hammer and fixing that stuff. And if you don't think they're quick, you have to remember that this game is very old, and there have been some suspicious editions of this game. Looking at 5th edition specifically was pretty bad for a couple of armies where they would just table you turn 1 almost guaranteed every time, and that never got fixed until their like new codexes came out in the next edition, or until there was an errata like a year after their codexes came out, because it took forever to get updates or FAQs from Games Workshop back then. They were more of a model company. They didn't care about the rules of the game. They cared about the rules of the game, but they were there to sell models and sell a narrative. They didn't care about the competitive aspect of the game as much as they do now. Now it's a lot more of a competitive game. It is a hell of a balanced game, and it is just, the orcs are a little suspicious, but I'm recording this after the errata. It was a soft change for the orcs, mind you, but they're smart. They don't come in heavy-handed anymore like they used to in 8th edition. The orcs are still very playable, and their list is technically less efficient, and it is harder to do what they were doing before. Are they still damn good? Absolutely. But you do not want Games Workshop to come, no matter how much you hate the orcs, you do not want Games Workshop coming in heavy-handed and just nerfing to the ground and making it unplayable. They have to approach it with wisdom and not make the mistakes they made in the past. And if it's still a little too powerful, give it a month and it will get fixed. More so if they need it. They are very quick with fixing. That Orc Codex came out in October officially, and those lists started dominating for like the last month and a half, and now it's fixed, or at least fixed a little bit. And then maybe another month and a month and a half from now, it'll be fixed to a playable state. And to have a good fix in like 2 to 3 months is incredibly high turnover rate. They could, there could be a couple of events and they could come in heavy-handed and a little scared and be like, okay, you can only have, these buggies are now 200 points each, and you can only have 2 aircraft in your army list, and they're more expensive. And all of a sudden the orcs are worthless and they can't do anything, they can't compete anymore. But now there's a little more, now there is a lot more counterplay to it, if you believe it or not, against the orcs. So, now they have, because they have to take big units of them. So if you, it's an extreme example. Say you have a Knight Castellan. The Knight Castellan could look at a buggy unit and then put the Volcano Lance into it, and then that damage would spill over and kill the other buggies. Whereas before, they were all individual buggies, and you'd have to, your very heavy firepower would have to be split up amongst the buggies or extremely overkill one of them, and then you only really killed an 80 or 90 point model, and that ultimately has no effect in the grand scheme of things. Now the Orc Alpha Strike is still an issue, naturally. But now the orc players might think they might want to deep strike their buggies more, and because to keep them safe, because if there is extreme firepower on the other side that they do go first, they could kill all 3 buggies because they must take them in units now, that they might want to put them in the teleporter, and thus losing their initial alpha strike, allowing for more counterplay from their opponents. This is a good change regardless. But, and I will stand by that, this is the most balanced 9th edition Warhammer 40K has ever been, because of the quick response from the Games Workshop balance team, if anything does get a little out of hand. And, of course, proper terrain on the table, proper use of the terrain, all of that stuff. Let's see. Is there any more questions? Oh, Luka the Dago. Y'all ought to check out Kings of War Vanguard, an awesome game. That is their skirmish game, if I am thinking correctly. The skirmish game is cool. I like skirmish games as long as they're done properly and there's a lot of cool, weird charts. But nothing can beat Mordheim. Unless this one is better than Mordheim, and I just not bothered to look into it. Okay, let's see. Do we have... Luka, what happened to Vito? Vito has his own channel, his own painting studio, and it's Trident and True Hobbies. Check him out on Instagram. Luka, can you please tell Josh to decorate his beard for Christmas? I can run it by him. I got to remember, I have got to go up and look at getting Redukar the Beast and getting Belladonna. That is okay. Wow. That's funny. Mr. Fancy Pants, that's a funny question. I'm not going to say it on camera, but all right, that's pretty much it. There's no more real questions for me. Sorry for the little lag there at the end. But this is great sit and talk. And I want to remind everyone that it'll continue next week, but it'll be Matthew's sit and talk. And again, if you're not familiar with who Matthew is, he runs a lot of the narrative campaigns. He's one of the owners of MiniWarGaming, and he is my boss. So if you have any questions for him, personal or business related, he will be more than happy to answer them. And again, that will ideally be on the I'm pretty sure he exclusively only checks the MiniWarGaming website. And that's where you'll want to leave questions for Matthew if you have any for him. So thank you everyone for all the questions. Thank you everyone for sticking around and listening to me ramble for probably like an hour and some change here. And thanks for caring about what my opinion is, I suppose, on certain aspects of the game. It's like truly humbling in a way. I don't want to I never want to approach anything too like heavy-handed. But there are a few things that I think I have a pretty strong opinion on, and I don't know if I'm right or not, but it's kind of how I feel about it. But I appreciate anyone just sitting down and listening to that. And I guess I'll see you guys next time in next Sit and Talk, or heck, probably in a Battle Report sooner or later. Or I'm about to do a live show later today as well, but you won't know that until you've seen this, I suppose. Anyways, I'm going to let you get back to your day, get back to your painting, get back to whatever it is you need to do. Happy wargaming, everyone.